Today we start with recruiting because there's a trend Oregon fans should keep their eyes on.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Do you want to know what to know going into tonight's basketball matchup with Indiana? I'll have that for you on today's show with Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers. And Josh Pate said something very true that you should all hear about Oregon football. But I'm starting on the recruiting trail today. A couple of thoughts bouncing around here. So Oregon, according to 24/7's metrics right now, has the number 2 class in the country. Now, it's the first week of March. Now, we've been saying, they've had the number 1 class since, kind of early February or so. And Oregon now, we're getting into March. We're progressing slowly but surely. We're that much closer to Oregon football in 2025 in the spring game on April 26th. But I'm watching USC. USC currently has the number 1 high school recruiting class, according to 24/7, one spot ahead of Oregon. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to stay that way forever. Oregon's going after some big-time names. You talk about Jared Curtis, who I'll get to in just a moment, or Ryder Lyons, or Brandon Arrington. And, by the way, those last 2 guys, USC guys. And that's kind of the point I'm curious to follow in the coming months on today's show. Because over the last couple of years, from a recruiting standpoint, USC has been underachieving, and Oregon has been filling that void. Over the last several years, frankly, that's been the case going back to the Cristobal administration, where you had that whole, Cali Flock or SoCal to Oregon. I don't remember exactly what the hashtag was, but it kind of culminated with, or began in earnest with, Kayvon Thibodeau, a SoCal kid, going up to play for Oregon. And that turned everybody's head going, wait, the number 1 player in the country is going to Oregon? Defensive guy? Wait, he's not going where? Well, USC has not been what they used to be on the recruiting trail for a very long time. But right now, Lincoln Riley has the Trojans in a position. By the way, Oregon plays USC this year at Autzen Stadium, in case you did not know. But the recruiting battles between Oregon and USC have popped up. The earliest one I remember covering here on the show was Jalil Florence, and that's worked out pretty well for the Ducks. Of course, he was injured this past year, but has been a good player in the 2 seasons that he has been healthy for Oregon. But I think the recruiting battles between Oregon and USC are going to become more readily apparent, or more readily visible, I should say, for a lot of high-profile kids. Because there appears, at least from the outside looking in, to be a concerted effort from USC to start to ratchet up their efforts. Now, this is not going to bring Oregon down. I don't think that USC succeeding more than they have in the past means Oregon has to come down. I do think the dynamic between these 2 schools is really interesting to follow, because when they are right, at their best, invested properly, got the right coaches in place, and doing all of the little things as well that are important to recruiting, these are the 2 premier recruiters out west. And quite frankly, there's a gap between those 2 when they're at their best and everybody else and what they're capable of accomplishing. Yes, Washington can be a good recruiter. I don't know that they have pulled, off the top of my head, a top 10 class. They kind of hovered in the Chris Peterson era in the top 15 to 20 range. They might have had a top 10 class in there, but they have not shown, and Jed Fish is just kind of getting things going again up there in Seattle. They have not shown the ability to have the high-end recruiting potential that Oregon and USC have had on the trail. So when I see USC starting to go after bigger names or get bigger kids to commit, and frankly, this started a little bit in my mind last year when Jakeem Stewart committed to USC. That's someone Oregon was heavily after. That took a lot of investment, a big NIL offer, by the way, which I have no problem with, but make of that whatever you will if you ever come across USC fans in the online space. But Jakeem Stewart was the first guy that really turned my head to go, oh, they might be changing things a little bit. So they hired Danton Lynn, who was Chip Kelly's defensive coordinator for a year at UCLA, moved him across town. He's been really, really good, and they're trying to revamp not just on that side of the ball, but in the trenches writ large. And landing a guy like Stewart, I think on paper, is something you would look at and say, well, Oregon's certainly going to get that kid, right? Dan Lanning's a defensive guy. Tosh Lupoy is a defensive line recruiting guru and has been, but he wound up going to USC. So this is just something that I keep my eye on. Now, this brings me to the quarterback situation. Could Oregon bring 2 quarterback commits in the class of 26? Yes, absolutely. And I would love to see them land both Ryder Lyons and Jared Curtis. Now, Curtis, to me, if I had to pick one, is the guy I would rather have, just because I am bullishly high on that guy. One of you said I'm not supposed to say bullish because I used it too often. So I'm aggressively confident Jared Curtis can be a superstar in college football and beyond. So he's the quarterback prospect that I like most and that most people are the highest on in this class of 26 cycle. But the reason Oregon could go after both of them is they have different timelines, since Ryder Lyons is LDS, so he's going to go on a 1-year mission after finishing high school in 2026. So Oregon's been after both of these guys for quite a while. Curtis is going to visit Oregon on June 6th and Georgia on June 13th. He might have committed by that time. I've gotten the sense that he has a bit more of an accelerated timeline compared to some of the other guys that you'll see in the 26 cycle. But I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean, Oregon had Xavier Larissi commit just last week. Pretty sure that was last week. All the days are blending together, but guys commit at various times. Larissi still has, visits lined up to go to other places and such, but everybody's different. But we're starting to get into commitment season, and Curtis is certainly the biggest name to watch, especially because for Oregon's 2026 class, they're very defensive heavy at the moment. They have 10 commits, and only a few of them are on the offensive side of the ball. Kendra Harrison, the tight end, Cody Green, the offensive tackle, Tredarian Ball at running back. Everybody else, those guys are actually, according to 24/7's metrics, the 3 highest rated guys in the 2026 class. But the other 7 players are all on the defensive side. But sometimes, not always, but often what you will see in recruiting classes is a quarterback can be kind of a bell cow recruit. He can be kind of a magnet for other players to say, oh, I want to go play with him. I want to build this culture. And he can then be a recruiter for Oregon on the trail as well. So 2 quarterbacks is entirely possible. But Brandon Arrington is one of, if not the best athlete, DB or corner kind of guy in this 2026 class. USC is one of the teams to watch. Oregon also very heavily in the fold right there. Ryder Lyons, his brother, plays for USC, and the Trojans are going after him as a 2026 quarterback as well. Now, they've got Jonas Williams committed already. I don't know exactly how that will play out, because Jonas Williams was committed to Oregon, now committed to USC. I don't know how they would handle all of that. Maybe Williams would commit to a 3rd different school because they feel like Lyons is a higher priority. Not sure. Not privy to USC's recruiting interests as much as Oregon's, of course. But those are the sorts of battles that I'm really following here in the upcoming weeks, because Oregon doesn't have a quarterback, looking for more offensive players, I'm sure, in this class. But the USC angle, I am more than a little curious to see if we don't see USC in the mix for some of these high-profile guys Oregon is going after. And, it can depend on the year, because last cycle, USC went after a bunch of kids that were from the southern part of the country, had them committed, and then they ended up flipping elsewhere. Guys on the defensive line like Justice Terry went to Texas. I think Isaiah Gibson was the kid who went to Texas A&M, I believe it was. They had another 5-star that flipped as well, who was originally committed, but they weren't from the West Coast footprint. So if you're finding kids, now Jared Curtis is not a USC guy, but Ryder Lyons is from Folsom, California. So just some recruiting nuggets to start your Tuesday morning, afternoon, night, Wednesday maybe, depending on when you're listening to or watch this show. Keep an eye on USC, because I think in the last several years, compared to what they're capable of, they haven't been in on as many targets or as many high-profile targets when Oregon has gone in these big-time recruiting battles. Watch to see if they start to elevate the recruiting game and try to get to where Oregon has been on the trail in the last couple of years. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or hit me up on Twitter. Josh Pate said something 100% accurate about Oregon. Speaking of branding, by the way. First, this episode brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. That's what they're all about. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. None of this robotic nonsense. Talk to real people who want to help you get the job done right. And their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. So the other day, I was listening to Josh Pate's show, and I like Pate. Doesn't mean I agree with every single one of his takes, but he had a really interesting thought about Oregon. And this comes up pretty frequently, and yes, predominantly online, perhaps, but I have encountered it a non-zero amount of times in just my personal interactions with college football fans as well, hence why it is a recurring topic from time to time here on the show. So, Pate was ranking his top programs in college football. He had Oregon at number 6. If you think that's too low, let me know. But he was given a 4-year snapshot, I think, of last 4 and next 4 and such. Had Oregon number 6. I think that's, I think it's pretty fair. They have to be inside the top 10. Are they number 2? Maybe not. But, I think 6 is perfectly fair. But he made this point, and I think is a really, really good one. He said, quote, "They've got deep resources, which for some odd reason is used pejoratively against them. Well, yeah, they've got Nike. You're selling their program for them when they do that." Talking about those who hurl stones at glass houses at Oregon and such. And he was just crystallizing thoughts that I have had for quite a long time in this regard, which is Nike makes Oregon such low-hanging fruit for people. There's something about that connection that makes it click in their heads. Texas A&M has been every bit as invested in their football program financially for the last 10, 15 years, whatever you want to call it, since the Johnny Manziel days. Ever since they had their elevation moment, like for Oregon, that was Chip Kelly in a significant way. For Texas A&M, it was Johnny Manziel. But they have put insane amounts of money into their program, and they haven't even made a conference championship game in the SEC, let alone won a conference championship, which Oregon did in the Pac-12 in 2019. They, of course, made the game in 2021 and 23, and they won the Big Ten this past year in 24, won the conference championship 2014 as well. Like, they have far more to show for it. But in your experience as an Oregon fan, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Maybe I'm overblowing this. I don't think that I am. Does Texas A&M, who is certainly an easy boogeyman target in college football, does that feel as targeted or specific as what Oregon gets from fans or media or whoever? Like, to me, it really does not. There's something about that Nike connection, and I think that Pate makes an exceptionally good point, which is, yeah, Nike is a selling point. It's part of the reason that that kids come to Oregon, or that they've been fans of Oregon, even though they grew up on the other side of the country. Because of all of that stuff. It's great. It's awesome. So I had that thought and wanted to share because that was just something that really, that resonated with me. That I thought, yeah, that's the whole point. Like, I want my teams to invest, care, put in the maximum amount of effort and financial investment that they can. In college sports, it's seen as a bad thing. Not really sure why. Are they supposed to not care? What's the right level of caring? I don't know. I always get confused by those conversations at times. But anyway, wanted to bring that up. And this question as well that came from Kevin, who asked, and by the way, you can send in a mailbag question as well. YouTube comments, Twitter, become a Locked On Ducks insider, link in the description below. You get priority access and other perks as well. You can get a free 14-day trial too. Kevin sends in this question asking about the 2023 Oregon team against the 2024 Oregon team, who would be favored? because another question came in saying, well, 2024 versus 2025, who's favored? I said on a neutral field, probably 2024 by around 7 points. I think after thinking about it for a while, 7.5, which is what I said originally, might be a tad high. I'd still probably go 6.5. That doesn't guarantee, because games are not played on paper, of course, that Oregon 2024 beats 25. I'd feel pretty confident in saying that, though. The 2023 versus 24 debate, that's a more interesting one. I think from a roster standpoint, Oregon was better in 2024 outside of quarterback. But at quarterback, I'm taking Bo Nix over Dylan Gabriel. So how would that get factored? Boy. Where would Spencer Sportsbook set that line, 2023 Oregon versus 2024 on a neutral field? I'd probably say 2024 is favored by less than a field goal. I'll say 1.5. 1.5, and that's not me knocking 2024 Oregon. That's me saying, yeah, that 2023 team was really good. But the additions of Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell were significant, and they're about to get drafted here in the coming weeks, and Harmon's been crushing it at the combine, which surprises me absolutely zero, because that guy's awesome and should be a first-round draft pick on the interior. But yeah, I'd probably say 23, just a slight underdog. Because the other thing too, that 2023 offensive line, I don't think that it was as good as 2024's once they settled in, right? Took them a while to get going, but overall, the 23 unit was really good and the numbers were great. I think Bo Nix made those numbers look even better than they were. Like, take Josh Connerly, good player in 2023, one of the best players in college football. I think he was second team All-American this past year in 2024. That's a significant jump. I think Johnny Cornelius was mostly the same guy, which was, of course, a really good player. But that's one of the reasons going into 25. I mean, there are several areas where I have question marks, but how you replace bookend tackles like Connerly and Cornelius, and they've got Isaiah World, who's come over from Nevada, top player in the transfer portal at his position. I think maybe the top overall player according to 24/7's rankings. He's a 5-star transfer. He probably starts at left tackle. The right tackle spot, probably Alex Harkey, the Texas State transfer. But if it's him or if it's Janoris Wilson, who was, the jumbo tackle in this past season of college football, I don't know. Is that as good as Johnny Cornelius? Johnny was really good the last couple of years. So that question mark, I don't think can go overlooked. But I'm really fascinated to see how these questions get answered for Oregon as the 2025 season progresses, because there are just so many of them. The offensive line lost 4 guys from last year. D-line lost 3 guys, 2 linebackers, 6 defensive backs. That's a lot. That's a lot. But this is also why you recruit, why I was talking about recruiting earlier. And yes, the portal is great. And the portal has benefited Oregon tremendously. You still build your rosters with your high school talent predominantly. So I think that for to your question, Kevin, I'll take 2024 Oregon slightly. But Oregon is going, perhaps the biggest transition of all, is in each of the last 2 seasons, Oregon has started at quarterback the most experienced player at the position in the history of the sport. And now it's going to be Dante Moore. There's going to be an adjustment phase. But the good news is that schedule is incredibly favorable. Incredible. You've got 3 of your first 4 games at home. The road game is at Northwestern, who they have significantly more talent than. It could get really fun. But I am glad they don't have, a 2011 LSU, a 2022 Georgia, some game like that, big marquee week 1, wouldn't want that for this team. But luckily, they don't have that. So they'll have some time to figure things out before they go to Penn State, which is easily their toughest game of the year. But keep the questions coming, always and forever. Is Oregon basketball going to win their 6th straight game? Indiana is sneaky. Here's what you need to know about that game. Tuesday night hoops in the Big Ten, Oregon, Indiana. One team squarely in the NCAA tournament. One team squarely sure of absolutely nothing with regards to its basketball program. Jacob Goins, Locked On Hoosiers. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. So we cross over for the final segment of today's show, Jacob, because our teams shall square off tonight at Matthew Knight Arena. Senior night, Hoosiers, Ducks, Hardwood, because that's what the Big Ten brings us when Oregon's, part of that conference. It's still strange to me. It's still odd. But these teams are weird for different reasons. Oregon's weird because they lost 5 straight games. We were firing Dana Altman in certain corners of the internet, and now he has won 5 in a row, going to make it 6. I don't know. You make of that whatever you want. Mike Woodson won't coach for Indiana next year, but they're suddenly a bubble team, according to Joe Lunardi. So
heck, some people have us off the bubble. We're flat in the tournament. It's a miracle.
Yeah, it certainly is. Between these two teams, Jacob, I think it's pretty clear Indiana needs this win more than Oregon does. I would very much like for Oregon to win the game. Of course, winning's better than losing. I would love for Oregon to be a 4 seed rather than a 5 seed. I think your first round game is significantly less dangerous. If you get there, beating Indiana would help on the march to get there, but Indiana needs this more than Oregon does.
There's no doubt. I mean, we're looking for one more quad 1 win. This is our last quad 1 opportunity. We have a home game against Ohio State on Saturday. While they're a good team, with that being at home, it's technically quad 2 as of now. I expect it to stay that way. So our resume is not great, but as of late, it's much better. And we are hoping for a little bit of recency bias to get Indiana into the tournament thanks to wins over Michigan State and Purdue. If you could top that with a quad 1 opportunity against Oregon on the road, there would be almost no way to leave Indiana out, no matter what happens on Saturday against the Buckeyes and whatever happens in the Big Ten tournament for whatever that's worth. I don't think it's much, but that's why you have to win a game like this to where you leave almost no doubt for this Hoosiers team who was left for dead off the bubble, not even in consideration. Then the Woodson news comes out and, hey, all of a sudden, it's like we're a good basketball team again. It's a miracle. It's unbelievable, Spencer. So, yes, Indiana needs this win a lot more than Oregon does.
Yeah, and it's just so strange how it's playing out right now. Like, Mike Woodson is a lame duck head coach. He knows it. His team knows it. And look, sometimes that can free you up to start playing good basketball and just let loose. Say, who cares if it's all for whatever this run will wind up being. But let's talk about the game itself, because Oregon has kind of flipped the switch. I don't say entirely. I think they flipped it like 3/4 of the way up the light panel there. Because offensively, they have been an incredibly consistent team. Defensively, they've been better. But that's kind of where, the game gets decided for Oregon in the last couple of weeks. You look at their point totals, even going back to the 5-game losing skid. They put up 76 at Michigan. They had a 50-point first half at Michigan State and lost both of those games. And those were big opportunities, of course. But the Wisconsin game is where it all kind of came together. And where everyone, I think, on the Oregon side of things, tuned back in was going, oh, okay, so are we back? Are we Final Four? Yeah, like you just really don't know. But defensively for Indiana, if you don't have the answers against this Oregon team right now, they are deep and they're shooting the ball really well.
Well, that's the problem, is Indiana is very susceptible to giving up a lot of points in terms of shooting from the outside, because Indiana's man defense has not been great this year. We've started to play some more zone, and it got us in trouble early because our communication was terrible. And you know this, when the ball moves, the zone moves. And if the zone doesn't move, you got open shooters. But Indiana started to figure it out a little bit, and offensively and defensively, we've gone away from a 2-big system. We brought in Oumar Ballo from the transfer portal. You had Malik Reneau come back. It was a no-brainer. Play 2 big guys and have one of the best front courts in all of college basketball. That just didn't work. And here recently, we've gone away from it. We said, to heck with that. Oumar Ballo, sit on the bench. Malik Reneau, have yourself a day. And that's exactly what he's been doing. And I think it frees up Indiana offensively. And on the defensive side, it allows us to get out to shooters more and stay in front of the basketball. And so, look, we're on the road, but we beat Michigan State on the road. And we've hung with a bunch of good teams on the road. I'm not sure how we perform in this sort of environment. I don't think Washington was all that big of a test. We handled business there. And so I am curious to see if Oregon gets hot, if they go on a run, can Indiana respond? Because we're shooting pretty well as of late, but it's on the road in a brand new gym. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and Oregon shooting has been pretty well spread out. Jackson Shellstad, preseason All Big Ten selection, has been living up to that billing really all year long. He's been great down the stretch. He found his three-point shot after really struggling in the non-conference slate from beyond the arc. But Keyshawn Barthelemy, instant offense guy. Nate Biddle, reigning Big Ten Player of the Week after they went to Wisconsin, pulled the upset. He was great in that game, and Oregon had some other good performances as well. But defensively is where Oregon has been up and down, inconsistent, which is strange. That's not historically what Dana Altman teams have been, but that's what they clearly are now. This is an offensive team that when they play defense well is going to win the basketball game far more often than not. But, that's where the Hoosiers, I think, have to be able to exploit Oregon is they have had defensive lapses. They have had, in their matchup zone defense, they don't always settle in or find the right level of intensity until the second half. Particularly early in games, Oregon has not been a great defensive team.
And look, Indiana, I guess over the season has typically gotten off to slower starts offensively, but it literally all starts on the defensive side of the floor. If Indiana is communicating, getting stops, and limiting possessions, or at least limiting shots per possession, then Indiana's got a chance. It's when you give a team like Oregon second, third, fourth opportunities per possession. Oregon's too good, man. They will knock down those types of shots, and Indiana can't outscore anybody. They can't run and play in the 80s and 90s. We're just not built for that. We want to be 60s and 70s. It's gross basketball. I get it. But that's where Indiana wins games. And so if Malik Reneau can stay out of foul trouble, if the guards can step up, it's been a shift in the guards as well. It's been more Anthony Leal, Trey Galloway rather than Miles Rice. Cannon Carlisle hasn't sniffed the floor. And you do have right now, too, Luke Goody, who is our best three-point shooter, the Illinois transfer, who is starting to come into his own. And a guy in Mackenzie Mbako, who was a sophomore this year that we thought was going to have a surge, just hasn't happened. So it's been a complete shift in the starting five, a complete shift in the way this team plays, and somehow it's led to more wins and making the NCAA tournament. If we do those things in this game tonight against Oregon, I think we have a really good shot.
I think the key for Oregon is keep Indiana under 75 points. I think if they do that, they have an excellent chance to win. But, for Indiana, I think their formula is to look back at the Purdue game. Go watch that tape. And that was, in the midst of, that was, I think, starting Oregon's 5-game losing skid that preceded this 5-game winning streak that they're on right now. Purdue came to Matthew Knight Arena and just took away everything Oregon wanted to do on offense. It was a low-scoring, slugfest battle. Felt kind of old-school Oregon basketball, but that's not what this team is really built to do. And look, they love to shoot the three, and sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not as great. But if you're Indiana, I think the biggest key for the Hoosiers in this game, Jacob, you take away Oregon's inside scoring, which isn't that big, and you put the pressure on the three-point shooters. I don't think that's where they are at their best. I think when they get their three-point shots from an inside outlook is when they are successful offensively, and I think a lot of coaches will tell you, even three-point shooting heavy teams, that's how they want to get looks from beyond the arc. I think if they can push around Nate Biddle, not allow Brandon Angel to get buckets, or KJ Evans off the bench, or whoever else, TJ Bamba, can drive the basketball really well. Yes, Jacob, he is still around in college basketball.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, he and Umar Ballo, legends of the Pac-12, RIP, are battling in this game because that's the way that college sports goes nowadays. But I think if you're Indiana, you pack the paint and say, hey, Oregon, are you going to go make 13 threes or whatever it was a couple of games ago? If you do, hat tip, I guess. But I think Oregon's offense is at its best when it's balanced.
And then offensively for Indiana, I'm telling you right now, if Oregon wants to stop the Hoosiers, find Malik Renew and throw a double at him and force the basketball out of his hands. Make somebody else beat you. This guy went to the hospital, got on the plane, helped this team smack around Washington, and he's playing some of his best basketball right now. Had some illness. He's fine. But Indiana's going to dump it down to him time and time again. If the Hoosiers have 40-plus paint points in this game, don't be surprised, because if it ain't broke, they're not going to fix it. It's Mike Woodson. Let's be real. Indiana's going to do one thing and one thing only. They're going to score in the paint. So for Oregon, stop Malik Renew. If you do, you got a good chance.
Yeah, and that comes down to two guys who are elite shot blockers, and Nate Biddle and KJ Evans. Biddle, though, against Ballo, I think that's the most interesting matchup in this game, because Biddle is taller. He's a little bit skinnier. This is not N'Faly Dante. This is a guy who is a great shot blocker, a good defender, but individually, he can get pushed around a little bit. And Ballo is a big, thick, strong guy. I think if Biddle holds his own at that end of the floor, I think Oregon has got a really, really good chance. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.